He is by far the most engaged Pope when it comes to First Nations issues in history.
Tonight, news that Pope Francis has passed at the age of 88.
I think that it's important that everyone cast their votes. If you're at the age of majority, I think everybody should go.
With 1 week till the federal election, we hit the streets of Kenora to find out what issues matter to the swing riding.
But to see all the other amazing Indigenous writers up there, it's really inspiring.
And Indigenous writers were honored at the Governor General's Literary Awards in Ottawa. Welcome to APTN National News this Monday evening. I'm Sav Jonesa. We start with the news that Pope Francis has passed away. The Vatican confirmed his death earlier today.
Devo annunciare la morte del nostro Santo Padre Francesco.
Made his final public appearance yesterday at the Vatican for Easter Sunday in front of thousands of people. He is the first Jesuit from Argentina, the first from the Americas, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, to the son of Italian immigrants. In 2022, Pope Francis delivered a historic apology to residential school survivors for the abuses they suffered. It's reported that Pope Francis passed away from a stroke and heart failure. Many have referred to him as the People's Pope. Pope Francis was just 88 years old when he died. Governor General Mary Simon is mourning the death of Pope Francis. In a statement, the Governor General said, Pope Francis was a beacon of hope and compassion, spreading messages of peace, love, and understanding throughout the world. She reflected on the Pope's 2022 visit to Canada, where he made a formal apology to Indigenous peoples in Canada, saying it was a testament to his commitment to respect, dialogue, and collaboration across cultures and faiths, values he held dear throughout his papacy. The National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations is among those extending their condolences on the passing of the Pope. Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak said in a statement that, quote, while the Catholic Church has a legacy of harms against First Nations, we acknowledge the progress made in recent years, largely due to Pope Francis's efforts. He listened to us and heard us. He invited us to the Vatican and apologized. It was monumental in our history with the Catholic Church. Woodhouse-Nepenak says First Nations people still struggle with their relationship with the Catholic Church for good reason. The national chiefs say the 2022 apology was an important step forward in the healing journey of many First Nations individuals and communities. Woodhouse-Nepenak says, thanks to the work started by Pope Francis, we are now engaged in productive discussions regarding the repatriation of sacred First Nations cultural items from the Vatican. For more on the death of Pope Francis and the legacy the pontiff leaves, we're joined by Negon Sinclair, a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press and Indigenous Studies professor at the University of Manitoba. Negon, thank you for joining us. Pope Francis came to Canada in 2022 to ask for forgiveness for the role the Catholic Church played in residential schools. Now with his passing, what happens next?
Well, they'll begin the process of picking a new pope, and hopefully that pope will not be a more conservative, exclusionary, and pretty regressive. One of the tendencies that institutions have, and we just have to look to the United States as an example, is when you have a very progressive leader like Barack Obama, you have a very regressive leader like Donald Trump who wants to roll back, become more exclusionary, a lot more divisive. And one of the concerns I have is that perhaps that will be the area that the church will go into. At the same time, Pope Francis has installed a number of bishops, and while removing some of the more conservative ones, some of the more ones that perhaps hearken to a darker chapter in the church's past. And so the hope is that perhaps the church will continue a progressive movement in which in many ways Pope Francis has started.
Okay, and what kind of legacy do you think he leaves for First Nations people?
I'd say that Pope Francis is the most progressive pope in history. He is by far the most engaged pope when it comes to First Nations issues in history. He was a good listener. He did things like not just come to Canada, respond to Call to Action 58 to apologize to survivors, and some survivors didn't feel satisfied with the apology. That's fair. But I would say that he did make the apology, and then he also made a penitential pilgrimage across the country. He went to Quebec. He ordered Catholics in Canada to stop trying to assimilate Indigenous peoples. He said that when Indigenous peoples are in our own customs, traditions, and communities, we are already showing the presence of God, which tells you that he believed residential schools were fundamentally wrong. And then he also called it genocide at the end when he was flying back home to the Vatican after visiting residential school survivors in Iqaluit, what he called Galilee, the outside parts of Christianity, not Jerusalem, the center of Christianity, but going to where Christianity really started, which is around food, community, and sharing, which he found in Iqaluit. He has a very strong history with Indigenous peoples. And one of those things that he heard was that he should repudiate the doctrine of discovery, which he also did months later after returning to the Vatican.
So going forward, what do you think this will mean for a reconciliation with the church?
Well, I mean, it really was never up to Pope Francis to perform reconciliation on behalf of the church. He was simply there to nudge the process along, and in many ways to set forth a path for the Canadian Council of Bishops, which are the leaders of the Catholic Church in Canada, to begin to act more ethically, responsibly with Indigenous peoples. The credit for Pope Francis coming isn't Pope Francis. It's actually Indigenous leaders, Indigenous Catholics, Canadian Catholics who demanded, called upon the Pope to come to respond to what survivors had been asking for, because the Catholic Church is a very big footstep in our communities. What I would say is that the Catholic Church really has to take upon themselves the call from Pope Francis, which is to act ethically, to move the church towards communities. And as in the words of Pope Francis, bring the church and make it for everyone, everyone, everyone. That's his words, not mine.
Well, great points there, Negon. Thank you so much for chatting with us about this.
Yeah, Negon, thanks so much.
Now to the Yukon, where RCMP are investigating the death of a First Nation woman in a rural community. Police say they were called to a residence in Ross River, about a 5-hour drive north of Whitehorse. They say 26-year-old Sky Dick had injuries reportedly from an incident involving a motor vehicle. Dick died from her injuries. An autopsy was conducted on April 16th, and a pathology report is expected in the coming weeks. Police say they're continuing the investigation into Dick's death. The Yukon Coroner's Service confirmed in an email to APTN News that Dick was a member of a Yukon First Nation. Last week, APTN profiled the Kenora Kiiwetinoong riding and its candidates. It's one of 36 ridings identified as a swing riding by the Assembly of First Nations. Now we bring you some voters from the riding as they tell you issues that matter to them. With more, here's TR Wheatley.
Shoal Lake 39 is one of 40 First Nations within the Kenora Kiiwetinoong riding. Last week, NDP candidate Tanya Cameron was canvassing here, which had people talking about issues that matter to them. This is 26-year-old Rebecca Mandaman's second election where she could vote. She's noticed a shift this time around. Indigenous issues aren't at the forefront for any of the parties.
Indigenous people, we're still here, and I think going back at looking at the last few elections where clean drinking water was a major campaign platform, residential schools, truth and reconciliation was a big platform item for the Liberals and the NDP at the time.
This massive riding covers a third of Ontario, including many fly-in communities like Bearskin Lake, where Tricia Nothing lives. In past elections, she's helped set up a polling station.
I think that it's important that everyone cast their votes. If you're at the age of majority, I think everybody should go.
A big issue up north, access to basic living needs and access to the south.
Climate is changing, and this year we had a really short winter road. I think it's almost time to start looking into an all-weather road.
She says there's a housing shortage. Unfortunately, hundreds of reserves are also in the same boat. It's also why Tracy McKay moved from another fly-in, Big Trout Lake, 15 years ago, only to end up unhoused 10 years ago.
I lost my My ex, he passed away, and my kids are in Whitefish Bay right now.
McKay hopes the riding's next MP starts with tackling homelessness and the drug problem, something that's become a national crisis.
Plus, drug use. I lost a couple people. Yeah, I quit a long time ago.
People living in and around Kenora are usually the deciding factor. Whoever takes Kenora wins the riding, and for the past 3 elections, it's gone to the Conservatives. But Andrea Campbell says despite poll predictions, the average person is tired of them.
We're tired of Pierre Poilievre's red herring issues and his attack on human rights and vulnerable people.
Campbell is also worried about voter suppression. In 2021, voters in the riding complained about not having polls in First Nations. Some ran out of ballots.
There's no oversight locally, and I haven't heard of what they're going to do to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Despite this, back in Shoal Lake 39, Mandamin continues to encourage young people to vote.
This riding that we're in, Kenora area, the Kiiwetinoong riding, has been held by the Conservatives, which is usually a non-Indigenous person, but we make up a big part of the riding, and we've chosen to not vote in one of our own or participate in the election to allow one of our own to represent us.
Using the last days of the campaign to let other voters know there are 3 First Nation candidates to choose from this time around. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
One region in Saskatchewan has changed its election boundaries since the last federal election. With just one riding covering most of northern Saskatchewan, candidates are pushing for meaningful change in a region calling for action. Rachel May looks at the candidates in Desnethi-Missinippi-Churchill River electoral district.
The Assembly of First Nations says whoever wins Desnethi-Missinippi-Churchill River could be decided by First Nation voters. Conservative Gary Vidal held Desnethi-Missinippi-Churchill since 2019. In 2021, he crushed Liberal Buckley Belanger 10,000 votes to 5,500. However, Loon Lake, Pierceland, and Meadow Lake, where Vidal is from, are now a completely new riding, Battleford's Lloydminster Meadow Lake. So Vidal isn't running again. He says MPs should live in the riding they're elected in. Jim Lemeg from Clearwater River Dene Nation near La Loche is carrying the torch for the Conservatives this time around. Lemeg is a former RCMP officer. He was a Saskatchewan Party MLA from 2022 to 2024. He says more must be done to ensure Indigenous people in the North get what they need.
When we think about Jordan's principle, and right now what communities are experiencing are a backlog of paperwork that needs to be done. That's something that needs to be addressed. And that's a policy that I'm looking at and thinking that needs to change.
Lemeg says growing up in northern Saskatchewan and healing from intergenerational trauma drives his commitment to represent the riding.
And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, so I can give back to the people of northern Saskatchewan.
Buckley Belanger is the Liberal candidate. He was born in Isle-la-Crosse. He was the town's mayor between 1988 and 1994. He was the MLA for the Liberals and the NDP for the area between 1995 and 2021. He is Métis and says the Liberals have proven they're serious about helping all Canadians, including Indigenous people.
The Liberal Party has been trying to reconcile with a lot of the Indigenous communities across the country, and we've seen evidence of that reconciliation, but now we must move to the next level.
Belanger says the riding is vast and diverse, and he wants Indigenous voices to be heard on a larger scale.
This is our opportunity. We have such a lot of possibilities coming forward. I say to them that I have the experience, I have the passion, I have the drive to make sure we go and represent our people.
NDP candidate Doug Racine is Métis. He served in the military for 12 years before practicing law for 25. Racine says he can bring a fresh perspective to what Indigenous people truly need.
We have to give them the resources. The First Nations are ready to do the heavy lifting. They just need a little bit of help. And I think that's going to be by honoring the treaties and taking another look at the NRTA.
When discussing the main issues facing the riding, Racine said there's no time for inaction and certain issues must be addressed immediately.
I think it has to be designated a crisis, the housing crisis, the homelessness crisis, the drug and alcohol crisis. It has to be designated that, and we need emergency funding up here ASAP.
All three candidates have identified housing insecurity and addictions as top priorities. Election Day in Canada is Monday, April 28th, 2025. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
We need to take a quick break now. We'll see you in a few minutes. Indigenous writers are featured prominently in the 2024 Governor General's Literary Awards. In a ceremony that took place at Rideau Hall on Thursday, they took 3 of 7 awards in the English category and picked up another in the French. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
Nonfiction, Winnipeg, Visions of Canada from an Indigenous Center.
It was an emotional day for Winnipeg Free Press columnist Negon Sinclair. Not only is he the recipient of a Governor General's Literary Award, he also lost one of his parents in the last year. Sinclair says his father, the iconic Murray Sinclair, is never far from his thoughts.
It's a bit bittersweet because when I heard about the award, I was with my father, who passed away in November, and he was very proud, and of course he also put out a book, so he was immediately asking why he wasn't nominated.
Sinclair's book, Winnipeg, takes home the Gigi Award for Best Contribution in the Fiction category. Calgary Métis playwright Kelly Crow is also being recognized in the drama category. For her play, There is Indigenous Violence, and There is Righteous Violence, and There is Death, or The Born Again Crow. She also lost her mother recently and sums up her feelings in this way.
It's emotional life to be an artist. I feel like it's important for me to be really close to my emotions, and so then that means that at important moments they tend to flow outwards into the whole room. I just had to tell the truth in that moment, and that's what I had to share.
Niska writer Jordan Abel takes home the Fiction Award for his book Empty Spaces, and Innu author Ovide La Fontaine in the French language category for young people's literature illustrated books for his contribution to Le Premier Arbre de Noël. Sinclair says non-Indigenous Canadians are driving much of the recognition Indigenous writers are currently receiving.
I think that's indicative of the explosion of Indigenous arts, but also the fact that the major publishing houses are listening to Indigenous stories and seeing them as marketable. And most importantly, I think it's Canadians that are driving that industry. They're driving the interest, they're learning, I think they're working towards reconciliation.
Crow has this to say.
But to see all the other amazing Indigenous writers up there, it's really inspiring and really encouraging. And I just hope all of our ancestors are looking down on us, watching us. Yeah.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
We're always looking for your feedback or story ideas. Here's how you can continue the conversation with us. If you have a story you want to share, send us an email to news@aptn.ca. To read and watch our stories, go to aptnnews.ca. You can find us online on your favorite social media sites, including TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. We're going to take one last break, but stick around. We'll see you soon. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. With spring in full swing, Dee Gallant shared a picture of Fonzie enjoying the nice weather. Fonzie shares a home with Murphy, an adorable canine, and Gypsy, a feline pal. Thanks for sharing, Dee. Send us your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Today was the opening day of the 24th United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Thousands of people gathered at the UN headquarters in New York City. Angel Moore reports.
I'm here in New York at the United Nations headquarters on the first day of the Permanent Forum, where Indigenous leaders and advocates have gathered to discuss the challenges of implementing UNDRIP and the responsibilities of member states. Speaking at the General Assembly about women's rights is water protector Autumn Peltier. She says she has realized water rights includes women's rights.
That's why it's so important to protect our women and advocate for women's rights and protect our waters at the same time. So I believe it's all interconnected and it's all important to talk about on the same stage.
The delegation from Quebec includes 10 chiefs, youth, and our AFN Regional Chief Francis Farrell-Paul for Quebec Labrador. He says there has been no action with UNDRIP since 2019, and the main concern is nation-to-nation discussions.
That consultation part, there's so many development on our territories, and there's been, we're always, as First Nation, participate in a good way, in good faith in this relationship with Quebec and Canada, but it's not always the case.
Another delegation is the National Association of Friendship Centers. Samantha Jack is the youth executive. She looks forward to connecting with other Indigenous youth.
We're looking for further connections, finding and sharing in global solidarity the expertise that we offer for urban Indigenous people in cities.
National Chief Cindy Woodhouse Nepinak is here to meet with the National Congress of American Indians to talk trade with the implementation of UNDRIP.
We've had cross-border trade for thousands of years, and it's unfortunate when governments around the world want to push to put all these tariffs on when we've never had tariffs before amongst ourselves. We've traded since time immemorial.
Tuesday's events will discuss the impacts of resource extraction and reindeer. Angel Moore, APTN National News, New York.
Great stuff, Angel. Sounds like a lot of great minds are coming together over there. That brings us to the end of our show this evening. I'm Sav Jonesa, and from all of us here at APTN, thanks so much for tuning in. Take care.